Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being here and also for your work and progress on the NAFTA renegotiations, particularly in the area of regulatory practices, anti-corruption issues, customs issues, and digital trade. Modernizing NAFTA with the digital chapter is essential, not only to protecting American innovation, but also access to markets through e-commerce that many of our American products and services are sold from. But I got to tell you, the President's decision to invoke a very little-used 1962 law to impose these broad tariffs is creating a lot of uncertainty, and it does threaten to derail some of the economic gains and benefits that we have seen recently in our economy. And it seems like every time now that I speak to a Minnesota company, they have a lot of questions about some of this uncertainty, the current trade climate that we have. Now, they usually begin the conversation by talking about the real economic benefits that they have seen, already seeing right now from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And they tell me how they're investing more in new equipment, they're reinvesting in their employees, and that's a good thing. But then they also will talk about some of the bad news regarding the new tariffs and maybe pulling the threat to pull out of NAFTA, for instance. And there was one Fortune 500 company in Minnesota recently that produces engines and generators. They said that half of their economic benefit made by tax reform will be wiped out by the steel and aluminum tariffs that are being imposed. And it's not just large employers that are being impacted or putting these projects on hold now. We have small manufacturers and small businesses like R&M Manufacturing that shared their thoughts with me directly, saying they're opposed to the steel and aluminum tariffs that are under Section 232, saying it would be disastrous for them as well as other small metal-forming companies, because raising their prices means they're going to no longer be competitive, and they're going to get clobbered. And so I support the President's objective and your objective of really fighting for the American worker that needs that support and helping employees of U.S. steel companies. But some of those gains are going to be swamped by some of the larger losses that could be felt by much larger losses at metal-consuming companies and other areas across the economy if we have those retaliation tariffs. And economists now are saying with the trade partnership, for instance, a study says the United States would lose 5 jobs for every job created in steel and aluminum savings. And that's without retaliatory tariffs. If you take in retaliation, it could be a net loss of 18 jobs for every job gain. And it's not even close. That's 470,000 jobs. And most of those jobs are production, they're blue collar, they're exactly the type of jobs that I think you and the President are intent on protecting. And then I think we're on pins and needles with the upcoming potential announcement later this week because retailers like Best Buy in Minnesota are concerned about the upcoming Section 301 tariffs. And I'm all for targeting Chinese intellectual property violations, holding them accountable, but let's be targeted in what we want China to change, and let's go after that, because consumer electronics don't have domestic production. And I hope we won't be seeing tariffs imposed on products that a lot of American families and consumers and small businesses purchase every day. It wouldn't make sense to raise the cost of a laptop for a college student or a couple $100 on a computer for a small business, for instance. And I would say, I would ask, how is that going to help change the Chinese minds? And I know in Minnesota we've got 800,000 jobs now that rely on trade. It's one of the reasons that we weathered the economic storm a lot better than most states. We have a lot of high-valued manufacturing. And those jobs, by the way, they pay a lot higher than average salaries. And so let's just not shoot ourselves in the foot. I don't believe any country wins a trade war. I think all countries lose. And Mr. Ambassador, I think every one of the companies I highlighted and I've heard from, they share the exact same goal that you have to change China's behavior. And I just want to ask, would you be willing to meet with some key industry leaders or make some folks are sitting down and we continue to work together on solutions that are really going to be effective in that capacity? And I'll ask some more follow-up targeted questions that are more specific in the written record, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, there's a lot there. First of all, with respect to that trade partnership study, I haven't looked at this one particularly. I've looked at those in the past, and the accuracy of them is so slow that I wouldn't let it keep me awake at night. That is not to say that the basic point that we have to balance downstream effects is very important, and we understand that. Nobody wins from a trade war. We certainly don't want a trade war. On the other hand, you have to ask yourself, can we go on with a $800 and growing billion-dollar trade deficit? There's only a handful of countries in the whole world that have a GDP the size of that. So we have to do something. And the people who are benefiting from the status quo are always going to be against it. And we understand that, and we have to balance their interests. But the reality is, if you're on a course that is unsustainable, you have to figure out something to change. So, am I willing to sit down and meet with business people? I'm happy to do that. And I would say I and my deputies do it every day. We've had an enormous amount of contact with business people, and I think it's an extremely important part of what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Master.
Thank you, gentlemen.